In a village where laughter could mean danger, 3 boys were about to learn that not every game ends with a smile. The moment their voices echoed down the dusty roads of Kambani, mothers grabbed their children, farmers secured their goats, and merchants hid their baskets. Tunde, Kwami, and Sephi, the 3 most mischievous boys in the entire village, were coming. Tunde was tall and quick-witted, always the first to suggest a prank. Kwami was strong and fearless, never backing down from a dare. Sephi, though smaller, possessed a silver tongue that could talk them out of almost any punishment. Together, they were unstoppable, or so they thought. Every morning, they met beneath the ancient baobab tree near the village well. This was their headquarters, where schemes were born and chaos was planned. They tie leaves to goats' tails, make strange noises to frighten women returning from the river, or shake mango trees before asking permission. The entire village knew their names, but not always with fondness. "You boys must learn respect," old Babeo would warn, shaking his grey head. "A tree that bends too far will break." But Tunde only laughed. "We're young, Baba. We're not trees yet." Even their teacher, Miss Adewale, grew weary of calling their names. They arrived late, disrupted lessons, and made faces behind her back. When punished, they'd promised to change, but by morning, they'd forgotten their words. Yet despite everything, they were bright boys. That's what frustrated the villagers most, all that intelligence wasted on pranks and mischief. There was one person in Kambani the boys never dared to bother, Mama Asha, the village herbalist. She lived in a small hut near the river, surrounded by gardens of mysterious plants that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Mama Asha was a woman of few words. Always dressed in long brown wraps with a deep blue headcloth, she moved through the village like a gentle breeze. She gathered herbs at dawn, ground roots in wooden bowls, and helped anyone who came to her with illness or pain. Some whispered she could speak to animals. Others claimed the wind itself obeyed her commands. Children were taught to greet her politely and never disturb her work. "Do you think Mama Asha really has magic?" Tunde asked one evening as they sat by the river. Sephi laughed nervously. "Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. But I won't be the one to find out." Even Kwami, the bravest of them all, felt uneasy whenever he passed her hut. There was something about her presence, calm yet powerful, that made noise disappear the moment she looked your way. But as days turned into weeks, the village grew too quiet for the boys' restless spirits. They'd played every prank, fooled every villager. The thrill was gone. "We've done everything," Tunde complained, throwing pebbles into the river. "There's no one left to fool." Kwami grinned mischievously. "No one except Mama Asha." Sephi's eyes widened. "Are you crazy? You want to turn into a frog?" They laughed, but the seed had been planted. In Tunde's restless mind, a dangerous idea began to grow. The moon hung full and bright over Kambani when the boys made their fateful decision. The air was thick with the smell of herbs and the sound of the river flowing behind Mama Asha's hut. "Just one small prank," Tunde whispered, trying to convince himself as much as his friends. "We won't hurt her. We'll just confuse her a little." Kwami agreed immediately, he always did. Sephi hesitated, kicking at the dirt. "She never hurt anyone. She helps people. Maybe it's not right. But peer pressure is a powerful thing." "Come on, Sephi," Tunde urged. "We're not going to harm her. It'll be funny." Under the cover of darkness, they crept toward her hut. Through the window, they saw Mama Asha grinding herbs, humming a melody unknown to them. Her face looked tired but kind, and for a moment, guilt flickered in Tunde's chest. But mischief won. Moving like shadows, they executed their plan. Kwami hid her walking stick behind the door. Sephi switched her clay pots, hiding one behind a curtain. Tunde climbed a tree and hung her bundled herbs on a high branch. Satisfied with their work, they fled into the darkness, giggling and congratulating themselves. The next morning, they returned to witness the chaos. But Mama Asha simply stood outside her hut, calm as ever. She smiled softly and spoke aloud to no one in particular. "Sometimes children forget that eyes are not the only way to see." Then, as if she'd known all along, she walked straight to the tree, retrieved her herbs, found her stick, and uncovered her pot. She went back inside without a word of complaint. The boys stared at each other, confused and unsettled. How did she know? Kwami whispered. She must have seen us, Sephi reasoned, but his voice lacked conviction. Ton frowned. No, she didn't. But she knew. That night, strange dreams visited them all. Days passed, and the boys couldn't shake their unease. Strange things happened. Goats stared at them longer than usual, the river seemed louder, the wind carried whispers. But pride kept them from admitting fear. Then, on the hottest afternoon of the season, they made a terrible mistake. While Mama Asha gathered herbs by the river, they crept back to her hut. This time, they weren't satisfied with small pranks. Kwami moved her large calabash filled with green medicine. Sephi mixed up her carefully organized herbs, not knowing which was which. Ton scattered her prepared roots across the ground. They were so focused on their mischief that they didn't hear her return. Her voice came softly from behind them. So this is how the wind plays today. The boys froze, their hearts pounding. Mama Asha looked at her ruined work, the spilled medicine, the mixed herbs, the scattered roots. Her expression remained calm, but something powerful flickered in her eyes. You want to act like animals, she said, her voice steady but carrying weight. Then live like them. She raised her carved walking stick, the beads hanging from it catching the sunlight. A gust of wind rushed through the trees. The ground trembled. The boys felt dizzy, their vision spinning. Before they could scream, their bodies began to change. Their arms tingled, their legs twisted, their voices caught in their throats. Where hands had been, small hooves appeared. Fur sprouted. Ears grew long. When the spinning stopped, they looked at each other in horror. They were no longer boys. They had become goats. Their terrified bleating filled the air as the reality struck them. They tried to speak, to apologize, to beg, but only a but came out. Mama Asha watched them calmly. You must learn to listen, little ones. Every action has its shadow. When your hearts learn kindness, your forms will follow. She pointed her stick toward the forest. Go. The world outside will teach you what I cannot. The wind blew again, and the three goats felt their legs move involuntarily. They ran, first slowly, then faster, away from the hut, away from safety, into the unknown wilderness. The forest was nothing like the boys had imagined. As goats, everything felt different, smells were overwhelming, sounds were sharper, and danger lurked everywhere. That first night, they huddled under a tree, shivering in the cold. The darkness pressed in around them, filled with the howls of hyenas and the rustle of unknown creatures. None of them slept. By morning, hunger gnawed at their bellies. They wandered aimlessly, searching for food they recognized. Finally, driven by instinct, Ton bent down and began eating grass. It was bitter and strange, but hunger forced him to continue. Kwami and Sephi followed reluctantly. Days bled together. They learned to drink from streams, to hide from predators, to run when dogs barked. The comfortable life they'd known vanished completely. Once, Kwami tried to return to his own home. His little sister saw him and laughed, clapping her hands. Look, a funny goat. She threw pebbles to chase him away. He bleated desperately, hoping she'd recognize him, but she only giggled and called for their mother. Heartbroken, Kwami ran until he couldn't hear her voice anymore. Rain came one night, cold and relentless. The three goats stood together under a small tree, soaked and miserable. They missed their warm beds, their mother's cooking, their dry clothes. Sephi bleated softly, like a prayer. A farmer once caught them eating his young corn plants. He threw a stick that hit Kwami's side, making him cry out in pain. Ton and Sephi helped him limp to safety, staying with him through the night. The world was no longer a playground. It was hard, unforgiving, and lonely. In their silence, however, something changed. They began to understand each other's bleats, not as words, but as feelings. Hunger, sadness, fear, care. They comforted each other in ways they never had as humans. For the first time in their lives, they truly understood what it meant to be vulnerable and helpless. By the 5th day, the boys, now goats, had changed in ways that went beyond their physical forms. They moved more carefully, no longer running wildly. They'd learned to survive, but more importantly, they'd learned to think before acting. One afternoon, they found an old shepherd resting under a tree. He had a kind face and gentle voice. When he saw the 3 unfamiliar goats, he smiled warmly. "You look lost," he said, offering them water from his pouch and some dry grass. The boys stayed near him for hours, comforted by his presence. For the first time since the transformation, they felt safe. The shepherd sang a low, soothing song, and they rested at his feet. Tunde thought about Mama Asha's words, "When your hearts learn kindness, your forms will follow." Perhaps this man was part of their lesson. He was patient, gentle, caring, everything they had not been. When morning came, the shepherd opened his arms wide. "Go where your hearts lead you," he said softly, as if he somehow understood their true nature. The goats bleated in gratitude and slowly made their way toward the river. At the water's edge, they looked at their reflections. They were dirty, thin, and tired, but something in their eyes had changed. The arrogance was gone. The careless pride had vanished. In its place was understanding. They'd played pranks on people without thinking about how it made them feel. They'd laughed at others' confusion and frustration. Now, they knew exactly how that felt, to be unable to communicate, to be chased away, to be misunderstood and alone. Sephi remembered every person they'd troubled. The woman whose water they'd spilled. The farmer whose fruits they'd stolen. The teacher they'd disrespected. Each memory now carried weight and shame. As the sun set, they made a decision. It was time to go back, not to hide, but to face Mama Asha and show her they'd learned. Together, the 3 goats began the long walk back to Kambani. The path back to Kambani was long, and the 3 goats walked slowly, their legs still weak from days of hardship. But their hearts were different now, heavy with regret but light with hope. As they approached the village, familiar sights appeared. The mango trees they'd once raided. The well where they'd played tricks. The school where they'd disrupted lessons. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. From a hill overlooking Kambani, they stopped. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Laughter drifted on the breeze. Children played near the baobab tree. Life had continued without them. Tunde bleated softly, a sound of longing. Kwami pressed close to him. Sephi looked toward Mama Asha's hut by the river, and in a wordless agreement, they knew where they needed to go. As they descended the hill, some villagers noticed them. "Look, 3 stray goats," someone said. A child tried to chase them for fun, but they kept walking, focused on their destination. When they reached the clearing near Mama Asha's hut, they stopped. The smell of herbs filled the air. Smoke rose gently from her roof. She was outside, pounding something in a wooden bowl, her movement calm and steady. She didn't seem surprised when she saw them. In fact, she smiled as if she'd been expecting them all along. The 3 goats stepped forward slowly, their hooves making soft sounds on the dry ground. When they reached her, they lowered their heads to the ground in a gesture of complete submission and apology. They couldn't speak, but their actions said everything. Their eyes, filled with tears, told the story of their suffering and their transformation. Mama Asha put down her bowl and stood. She walked toward them slowly, her long wrap brushing the grass. When she reached them, she placed a gentle hand on each of their heads. "You have come back," she said softly. "You have walked far, you have felt hunger and fear, you have been chased and cold." She paused, looking into their eyes. "And now you understand." Mama Asha looked at the 3 goats before her, seeing far beyond their animal forms. She saw the journey they'd traveled, the lessons they'd learned, and the change that had taken root in their hearts. "The heart learns best through experience," she said gently. "And your hearts have now learned." Tunde lifted his head, his goat eyes filled with remorse and hope. Mama Asha saw in that gaze everything she needed to see. The pride that once filled him was completely gone. "Now you understand," she repeated, her voice carrying both power and tenderness. She tapped her carved walking stick on the ground 3 times. There was a flash of bright, warm light. The air hummed with energy. A wave of heat rushed through the goats' bodies. They closed their eyes as the world spun once more. Their legs stretched. Their hooves disappeared. Fur receded. Ears shortened. The transformation reversed itself. When they opened their eyes, they were human again. Ton looked at his hands, real hands, covered in mud but unmistakably his own. Kwami touched his face, feeling skin instead of fur. Sephi sat down on the ground and wept, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. Their clothes were torn and filthy, their hair wild and tangled, but none of that mattered. They were themselves again. For a long moment, they simply sat there, breathing deeply, feeling the earth beneath their fingers, marveling at the gift of being human. Then Ton bowed deeply before Mama Asha, his forehead touching the ground. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you, Mama." Kwami and Sephi followed, prostrating themselves completely, tears streaming down their faces. Mama Asha's expression softened. "You have seen how the world feels when you take kindness for granted. Now you know what it means to live without respect and care. Remember this always." The boys nodded, unable to stop crying. They remembered every cold night, every moment of hunger, every time they were chased away. They remembered the pain of wanting to speak but only being able to bleed. "The river washes away dirt," Mama Asha said, "but only the heart can wash away pride. Go now, boys. Life better than before." The walk back through Kambani felt like a rebirth. Every step was heavy with memory but light with newfound purpose. Tunde, Kwami, and Sephi moved slowly, taking in everything as if seeing it for the first time. They stopped at a small stream to wash their faces and hands, watching the dirt swirl away in the clear water. Tunde looked at his reflection and said quietly, "We were fools. We had people who never hurt us," Kwami added, his voice thick with emotion. Sephi nodded. "And now we know how that feels." For the first time since their transformation, they laughed, not the careless, mocking laughter of before, but something softer, warmer, born from relief and peace. When they reached the village, their parents ran to them, crying and asking where they'd been. The boys hugged them tightly and promised never to cause trouble again. They didn't explain what had happened, some lessons are too sacred to share casually. The next morning, they returned to the baobab tree where their mischief had always begun. But this time, they came with different intentions. They sat together quietly, watching children play, and made a pact. "We must show everyone we've changed," Ton said. "Not with words," Kwami added. "With actions." Starting with Mama Asha, Sephi agreed. Every day after that, they went to her hut to help. They carried water for her garden, fetched firewood, ground herbs, and swept her yard. Mama Asha never said much, but her smile told them everything they needed to know. The villagers noticed the change immediately. The 3 troublemakers had become the 3 helpers. They assisted elders crossing roads, shared food with younger children, and even tended to goats with special care and gentleness. Old Babeo approached them one day. "What happened to you boys?" he asked, studying their faces. Ton smiled. "We learned to see with more than our eyes, Baba." The old man nodded slowly, as if he understood more than they'd said. Weeks passed. The boys who once brought chaos now brought peace. The hands that had played tricks now built and healed. The voices that had mocked now encouraged and blessed. Kambani flourished with their new spirit. Months turned into years, and the transformation of Tunde, Kwami, and Sephi became legendary in Kambani. Children who had never met them heard their story. Parents used their tale as a lesson in respect and humility. The 3 friends grew into strong, honorable men. Tunde became a farmer who shared his harvest with those in need. Kwami became a builder who constructed homes for families without shelter. Sephi became a teacher who spoke to children with patience and kindness. But they never forgot those days as goats. Sometimes, when the sun set and the wind blew gently from the river, they would meet at the baobab tree, their old headquarters of mischief, now their place of reflection. "Do you ever regret what happened?" Sephi once asked. Ton shook his head. It was the hardest thing we ever experienced. But it made us who we are. Kwami smiled. Sometimes life must break you before it can build you again. One evening, they visited Mama Asha together. She was older now, her hair whiter, but her eyes still held that same calm wisdom. They brought her gifts, fresh vegetables, a new walking stick, woven baskets. Mama, Ton said, everything we have become is because of you. She shook her head gently. No. It is because of what was already inside you. I only helped you see it. We will never forget what you taught us, Kwami promised. Then my heart is happy, she replied with a warm smile. As they left her hut that day, they passed a group of young boys laughing loudly near the well, mischief written all over their faces. Ton smiled knowingly. Should we tell them? Sephi shook his head. Everyone must walk their own path. But if they go too far, Kwami added, Mama Asha will be there. They laughed together and walked home under the stars, grateful for second chances, for wisdom earned through suffering, and for the magic of transformation that taught them the most important lesson of all. True strength is not in being fearless, it's in being humble. True wisdom is not in knowing everything, it's in respecting everyone. And true change is not forced from outside, it grows from within. Moral lesson. Dear friends, the story of Tunde, Kwami, and Sephi teaches us that our actions have consequences, and what we think is harmless fun might hurt others deeply. Pride comes before a fall, and those who refuse to listen will eventually learn the hard way. Empathy is learned through experience. Sometimes we must walk in another's shoes, or hooves, to truly understand their struggles. It's never too late to change when we open our hearts to learning and growth. Respect for elders and wisdom should never be taken lightly. True transformation happens from within, when we genuinely recognize our mistakes and commit to being better. Remember, every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Treat everyone with kindness, speak with respect, and live with humility. Subscribe for more moral stories. If this story touched your heart and taught you something valuable, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring African folktales and moral lessons. Like this video to help others discover this powerful story. Share with family and friends who need to hear this message. Comment below, what lesson did you learn from Tunde, Kwami, and Sephi? Come back every week for new stories that entertain, educate, and transform. Remember, change begins with understanding. Understanding begins with listening. And listening begins with respect. See you in the next story. The end.